All right, chapter 3, lesson 4. So the last 3 days we've been talking about adding and subtracting integers. Today and Tuesday of next week we're talking about multiplying and dividing, okay? The good news is I think you have enough background knowledge on this that it won't be too hard because you know how to multiply already, basic numbers. So you already got step 1 kind of out of the way. So first thing we need to talk about, though, is I just want to run through a little bit of adding and subtracting stuff from the last few days just to refresh our memory. And I'm only going to do one. And I just want to look at this one right here. Negative 6 minus 8. What do I have to do to solve this problem? What do I have to do? KCC, right? What am I going to keep? Yeah. What am I going to change? And then 8 to a negative 8. Okay, a lot of people sometimes people will forget to change this because they assume that that's a negative already. They get confused. So negative 8 plus negative 6 is actually negative 14. Okay? All right, so what we need to do today is we need to talk about our rules. There's actually rules for multiplying integers. Does anybody remember what an integer is, first of all? What's an integer? At? And there's some more to it. Negative and, Negative and what? Positive what? Whole number. Negative and positive whole numbers. So we're all dealing with all positives and negatives, whole numbers, no fractions, no decimals. So first thing you need to know is when you multiply two numbers that have the same sign. So example, if you have a negative and a negative number you're multiplying, the answer is always going to be positive. If you multiply two positives, the answer is always positive. If you have two numbers with different signs, it's always negative. Now I have a chart for you to basically write down so you can look at it and know exactly what the answer is going to be. But if I were you, before I make this chart, I would actually make this 4 columns. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And in this column, I would put the answer. And I should have did that. So you should have 4 columns in your table. Go ahead and make a table, 4 columns. So your first column is first number, your second column is second number, your third column is answer, and then an example. This way you can just look at it visually and know exactly what the answer is supposed to be. It's not a sentence you have to write or anything. So if I'm multiplying two positive numbers, my answer is going to be positive. If I'm multiplying two different signs, I'm going to have a negative. Again, two different signs, negative. Two same signs, positive. So go ahead and get this written down for yourself so you have a visual in your notebook about multiplying integers. Then you have some examples on the sides where you can kind of look at it. These are the rules you have to follow today. There's no KCC in multiplication, nothing like that. And we'll talk about dividing later on. We're just one step at a time. Yep, same thing dividing. We'll talk about that Tuesday. The good news is you know how to multiply. It's just knowing what sign to put with the answer. Does everybody understand the table? Not really? Okay, I'll explain the table in a second. Anything got a question? Yep. You know, negative 3 and negative 4. It's just a rule. It's a rule we follow. It's one of those rules that I'm never ever going to know the answer to. You know, like the math people that made up the math rules, like this is one rule they made up and we're sticking with it. Okay? Okay. All right, so let me explain how the table works. So let's say your first number in your problem is positive. Your second number is positive. Well, your answer is going to be positive. This is like something you've learned since, I don't know, 4th grade. Okay? Then, if we have two different signs, like if your first number is positive and your second number is negative, or if your first number is negative and your second number is positive, your answer is always going to be a negative number. Okay? Same with the bottom one, and this is the one you were questioning, and just the way it is. Two of the same signs, the answer is positive. So that's how you can remember. If you have two same signs, positive number. Two different signs, negative. Okay? So and we'll do some examples of that in a second. But before we do that, I want to talk about, so there's going to be some different ways you're going to see multiplication. What are some ways that you've seen multiplication shown to you before? Yeah. Like, how is it written? How are some ways multiplication's been written for you? Isabella? Okay, I mean like with a sign. Like there's different signs that we've used. What's a sign? What's one, Quinn? Yep, a dot would be one. Okay, you're probably familiar with that. What's another way? Matt? The X. You probably have seen that since 4th grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade. I don't know when you learn your times tables. Yep. Parentheses is one. An example of that would be if I have 4 times 6. These two ways are kind of ways of the past. The first two ways are kind of ways of the past. You're not going to see them a whole lot anymore. This is what you're going to see because that's more of an algebraic way of writing a multiplication problem, and you're slowly getting into algebra if you haven't noticed. So many times, today especially, most of your multiplication problems are going to be written like this. You can even have some that look like this. Even though they're all together, it's still multiplication. Yep, those parentheses still mean multiplication. So plan on seeing everything like this today. All right, so let's talk about how this is going to work. So let's talk about this one up here. Negative 9 times 2. Well, the first thing you got to do, just take 9 times 2. 12, or 18, right? 18, I was going to say 12. 18. Now you say to yourself, what's my sign going to be? Negative, or Nolan? Negative, because I have a negative here and a positive here. Two different signs give me a negative answer. Okay? What about this? First of all, what's the number, Landon? And that's going to give you what? 25. Now, if I have a negative and a negative, what's my answer going to be? Positive. You don't need to write it like this. You don't need to do that. Unless you want to, you can, but you know that that's a positive 25. Another thing you might see today are ones that have 3 numbers. Now, if you remember in your homework, we had some with 3 numbers on the bottom. There's like the last 4 on the homework were 3 numbers. How did you solve those? Do the first two first, and that's exactly what you're going to do here too. You're going to look here and say, okay, what's negative 6 times 2? Well, 6 times 2 is 12, correct? What sign is it going to be though? Yep, negative. Then I'm going to finish it out. Bring down what I did not use, times negative 3. Well, 12 times 3. Anybody remember that? 36. If you need to do it over here, do it over there, okay? Now I have a negative and a negative, so what's my answer going to be? Positive. Look at your chart. Look at your chart if you're not sure. If you have 2 negatives, make sure you know what that answer is going to be. Okay, let's talk about this guy. First two first. 8, and then whatever that is. That can look like a half 0, half 8. 8, and then a negative 8, because I have a positive and a negative, times my negative 3. 24, positive or negative? Positive, because it's 2 negative numbers that I'm multiplying. Okay? Fair enough? Easy to do? Like I said, the biggest thing is you know how to multiply. It's just figuring out what your answer is going to be, positive or negative. Okay? I'm going to skip to some story problems quick. because you will have some story problems in your homework today. So you can just listen right now. And the next one you can write down because it's shorter. So let's just listen to this one. It says, when 32 passengers on a roller coaster went through a loop, so if you've ever gone on a loop on a roller coaster upside down, an average of 65 cents fell out of everybody's pocket. That's a lot of money. And that's an average, so it could be more, it could be less. But an average of 65 cents fell out of everybody's pocket when they went through that loop. How much money did the passengers lose in all? Now, if I look at those two numbers, one of those numbers should be negative. What number up there should be negative? And how do you know, Matt? 65 cents because they lost money. Remember the first day when we talked about absolute value and it said, like, write the integer for a profit of $3 or you lost 21 yards. You remember doing that? Okay, so they're going to have you put that into use here. If you lost or 65 cents fell out, this is what it should look like. 0.65, that's 65 cents with a negative in front of it because everybody lost 65 cents out of their pocket. There's going to be keywords in your stuff today, in your story problems. It could be fell out. It could be lost. It could be decrease. All those good things. Now, how can I figure out how much everybody lost in all if I had 32 people that went on that roller coaster and everybody lost 65 cents? How can I figure out how much money is going to be laying on that ground, Mason? Times 32. All right, so let's do it. This is 10, carry the 1, 12, 13. Put my 0 down. 5 times 3 is 15, carry the 1. 6 times 3 is 18, 19. So this is what I have. How do I know where to put my decimal? How do I know? Does anybody remember Isabella, where do I put my decimal? 2 spaces, because I have 2 spaces here, 2 spaces here. Now looking at this number, should my answer be positive or negative? Why negative? I have a negative here and a positive here. So every time that roller coaster goes around, and if there's 32 people on it, that's how much money ends up on the ground. Wouldn't that be awesome? Think if they ran the roller coaster 100 times a day. Think how much money would be on the ground. I wonder how much people really lose. People have to lose something when they go on roller coasters. Yeah, think about it. And I'm pretty. Sometimes I think they make you empty your pockets. But I bet. But lost his phone? Yeah, who cares about the change, right? I wouldn't take out all my change. So that would be horrible. And then how do you get it back? Because, everything's fenced off. Anyway, okay. Imagine that. All right, so if you want an example in your notebook for a story problem, this one's for you because it's super short. Okay, so if you want an example, this one's for you. Before a storm, the temperature dropped 2 degrees per hour for 5 hours. What was the total change in temperature? And I'll wait to start talking about it because I know some of you are writing it down. So I want to make sure you write it and can hear it at the same time. Before a storm, the temperature dropped 2 degrees per hour for 5 hours. What was the total change in temperature? You're waiting. Think of what the keyword is in here. There's one of them that's probably going to be negative. What's my keyword? Dropped. So what number is going to be negative then? 2. Yep. Dropped 2 degrees, so it went down 2 degrees. Every hour for 5 hours. Now what am I going to do? If it dropped for 5 hours, 2 degrees every hour, Owen, what am I going to do? Times 5, yep. Okay, so we know 2 times 5 is 10, right? What's it, positive or negative though? negative. Two different signs. So that means the degrees drop 10 degrees. That happens during a storm sometimes. Matt?
What temperature was it?
Oh, let's say it was 86. Now it would be 76. You're right. Do you guys have any questions on story problems? Seriously, look for keywords. Because most likely, since we're multiplying integers, something in your story problem is going to be negative. Keywords: lose, dropped, decreased, fell out, things like that. What's that? Difference would be subtraction. So no difference today. No difference today. Okay? All right, a few more things I want to talk about. I'm going to go back here. And I'm going to talk about these little numbers up here. What are these little numbers called? Now, I'm not looking for squared and cubed. There's actually a name for them, Isabella. Okay, there's actually not quite. That's how it can be read, yes. But there's a name for them. It starts with an E. Starts with an E. Have you heard the word exponent before? Okay, those are exponents. Little numbers above are exponents. Now, what does that exponent mean, Nolan?
Multiplying -2 times.
Negative 4. Okay, so this is what, I know what you mean. I know this is what it doesn't mean, though. It does not mean -4 times 2. That is not what it means. It means you're going to take this -4 times itself 2 times. So if you're in your notebook, you better get yourself an example written down. -4 to the second power looks like this. -4 times -4. That negative is carried the whole way. You never drop it. So -4 to the second power looks like this. This little number tells, that exponent tells you how many times you're going to multiply it by itself. Now you're going to do your multiplication. 4 times 4 is 16. Well, I have two negatives there, so it's going to be a positive. Okay? Now the same thing up here. Let's look at this one. -3 to the third power. It's not this. It looks like this. -3 times -3 times -3. That's what this looks like. Now you're going to say, okay, well, the 9, a positive 9, because I have two negatives. Now I'm going to multiply by a -3. 27, negative. Yep, yep, yep. So careful with your exponents. It's not saying -4 times 2. It's that number up there is telling you how many times you're going to take -4 times itself. Yes, Mason. Okay, so let's go back. You got to go for the first step. If I look at this, they are all negative, but you got to remember, you got to do them individually. You got to do them in steps. So this, we're going to look at this first. I'm going to use a different color. We're going to look at this first. What's -3 times -3? 9, positive 9. So then I'm going to take this, and I'm going to multiply that 9 times that -3. Well, this is still a positive. 9 times that -3 would give you that 27, and negative, because that 9 is still positive. Okay? What questions do you have for me so far? Anybody have any questions? Have you ever worked with exponents before? A little bit, here and there. You maybe called it to the power of 2, or you maybe called it to the second power, or whatever. What's that? Good, good, that's good. All right, last thing. Today, they're also going to give you where you have to substitute. Remember this from a few days ago, where A is something, B is something, C is something. Well, they're going to give you a problem that looks like this. What is A? 2. What is B? Then you're going to solve. If you need to write it out so you can see it. They're going to be, some of them are going to be longer than this. Yeah, Matt.
How do you know if it's negative or not?
Well, it'll tell you up here. It'll tell you in the directions what A, B, and C are, or D and F. I'm not sure what but it'll tell you. It's not going to make you guess. So B is what? -3. But if it's squared, what is it really? Times -3 again. Does that make sense? Okay. And then this would be 9. This would be 9. Careful. I mean, they could get as tricky as something like this. I mean, it could get as tricky as something like that. Now, how would that be written? Well, what's A? 2. What's B? -3. And C would be what? 4. But how many times am I going to do it? It could be twice like that. So just so you know, it could be as tricky as something like that. What's that? It is. I mean, but if you write it out, it's not. So using your notebook and writing things out is a good idea. Don't try to do it in your head. Because then you're going to forget and you're going to say, oh, what was the first one? Was it positive or negative? And I can't remember. Well, I think it was this. Using your notebooks, writing things out will make it a lot easier for you so you don't forget a sign. Because if you, let's say you do this, and you forget a sign here already. Well, what's going to happen to your answer? I mean, you have to remember your signs through the whole thing. So that's important. So if you keep your notebook on your desk today, so you can just look, it'll make it very simple for you. And that's all I have. Okay, so why don't we get your books out and we'll talk about how your homework looks today.